This is the Authority Company podcast, conversations with leaders that are designing our future. Hola, I'm Joe Pardavila, and the healthcare industry is a precarious position. One, they have to have a fiscal responsibility to run the hospital, get everything done. And two, they have to have compassion for patients. It's a very delicate balance that a lot of doctors, nurses, and practitioners really struggle with. And my guest today is hoping to find a way to solve that. His name is Jim Decker. He's the author of the new book, Reviving the Heart of Leadership, Empowering Healthcare Executives to Lead with Compassion. Now, when people ask you for your receipts, they like to know what you've done. Well, Jim has the receipts and he has them in full. He has 47 years of healthcare leadership experience. We're going to talk about what it was like in healthcare nearly 50 years ago, what it's like now, and what can we do to bring compassion back to healthcare. Jim Decker, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm doing great. How about yourself?
I'm doing great as well. Thank you for asking. And so, Jim, I don't know how I came across this, but I found your resume and I look back, and you know how with resumes, they try to say, make it one page. Obviously, over the course of your long career, it's hard to relegate it to one page, but I like to scroll all the way to the bottom. And your first job was in 1976 as an administrative resident at Fort Sanders Regional Medical Center. 1976.
Right.
Jim, I always love to have people tell me about what it was in the why begone era. What was healthcare like in 1976?
Well, obviously, it was dramatically different than what it is today. Interesting enough, I put a lot of things in my book in the first few chapters about that period of time and what healthcare looked like and some of the issues we were dealing with. Things have changed dramatically. And really, it's been driven by a number of different primary factors. Technology obviously has dramatically changed in which healthcare is delivered. The reimbursement methodologies, both to practitioners as well as hospitals, have changed. And so that's put additional challenges in the way. But obviously, our healthcare delivery system here in America is great, and it's evolved. And even though it's a lot different than it was in 1976, I think it's really for the better.
Okay, so speaking of better, well, if you can answer this, what was better in 1976 as opposed to 2025 in healthcare? Was there something that stands out that in those early days that were like, man, if we can only turn back time and do X like we did in 76, we'd be better off?
Right. Well, that really is sort of the fundamental premise of my book. I believe that we really need to get back to the compassionate side of healthcare. In 1976, that was very evident, and we cared for patients, we cared for their family, we cared for each other. We spent a lot of time, getting close to people in need, and really met their needs from a very caring and compassionate standpoint. The name of my book is Reviving the Heart of Leadership, and really the term heart can connote a lot of different things, but really in this case, it's the compassionate side of healthcare. And I think we've lost a little bit of that over the years, to no one's fault, by the way. It's really a function of what has changed. I mentioned earlier technology, reimbursement systems, the financial side of the equation of having to be very attuned to cost. That's changed dramatically, but that's put our focus in a little bit different way. And I think probably if I could go back to 1976, I'd love to get back to that kind and compassionate way in which healthcare was delivered.
I love that. That's so good. Thanks, Jim. It is funny. I often joke on podcasts, Jim, that capitalism is the best ism. Like we've tried the other ones, communism, social, they don't seem to work as well. Capitalism is probably the best we'll ever get, but it also screws things up. And I think you're probably, just judging by the first few minutes of our conversation, is the financial aspects of healthcare is sort of one of the things that kind of mucked things up a little bit and made it more complicated. Obviously, we can get into the rabbit hole of people being, uninsured, the cost of healthcare. But tell me about that. Do you think that is one of the driving factors? And you've been very honest, like there's not one thing to blame for the reason we got here, but the financial aspect is probably one of the biggest drivers in terms of the pain points for a lot of people.
Absolutely. I think you're really very accurate there in your observation. You know, back in 1976 was before Medicare enacted what's known as the prospective payment system. That went into effect in the early 1980s. That fundamentally changed the way in which hospitals were reimbursed by Medicare, put much more emphasis on cost control, which is not a bad thing. It needed to happen, uh, but it also probably placed way too much emphasis on the financial side of things and took a little bit away from the compassionate way in which healthcare was delivered. And that continues today. I mean, just look at the discussions both at the federal level and certainly in each state. Financial challenges related to healthcare are still there. We thought that the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, we thought that was going to cure a lot of the problems we had, and it did. It solved a lot of the issues in terms of access to healthcare networks and access to care, but it certainly has not solved all of the financial challenges the hospitals are facing. The world continues to change. Technology changes, and that's expensive, both clinical technology and information technology. And hospitals are really challenged with keeping up with that because the revenue stream is much different than it was 40 years ago. It's just a different world. Uh,
Hmm.
we continue to hear discussions at the federal level about cutbacks in Medicare, Medicaid, uh, and that's because the financial challenges that we're all experiencing continue to mount and get really in some ways worse every year.
In the book, you write about crucibles and growth, and a couple of the crucibles. You alluded to the Medicare one, but also COVID-19. How did some of those crucibles reshape the way you understood leadership?
Okay, well, let me first of all define what I mean when I say crucible. That's really not a term that I invented. I actually read an article in the Harvard Business Review several years ago that used that term to describe something that may fundamentally change the way in which you do things. It's an event, it's a development, something of that type. You mentioned Medicare as being one. I've already talked about that. COVID obviously changed a lot of ways in which we do things, both in an organization, in society, and in our personal lives. So those are two examples. But a crucible in and of itself can really change in which a leader addresses the issues in his organization. And that was what I was trying to describe in my book. Anytime something happens, either anticipated or in some cases unanticipated, it's going to change your outlook on things. As a good leader, needs to be able to be nimble enough to adjust to those changes and continue to lead the organization in the appropriate way. So every leader faces crucibles, whether you call it a crucible or you call it an event or you call it a bump in the road. That's really what they are. Everyone's going to face those, and yet how you deal with those are important in terms of both the success of the organization and the effectiveness of the leader himself.
Good stuff. We mentioned, we talked about the beginning of this conversation, compassion. And in the book, you write about compassion versus fiscal responsibility. And as someone who's been a leader in this space for a long time, what was, because obviously you're a compassionate person and you want to bring compassion back to medicine, but tell us about that delicate balance of the bottom line and checks and balances and pie graphs and Excel spreadsheets, but also compassion. Tell me about the struggle you had during your career with
Well,
that.
that's an ongoing struggle, and I wish I had the silver bullet to be able to address that. Uh, a leader, particularly a healthcare leader, is juggling so many issues on any given day that it's hard to do it all at the same time. Uh, every day you've got to be attuned to the financial side of the equation. I mean, you're the leader of the organization. You've got a fiscal responsibility. You've got a fiduciary responsibility to lead the organization in the appropriate way. So, looking at the spreadsheets and the pie charts and all of that are just part of the job. That's what you've got to do, and you can't take your eye off the ball. You also need to balance that with the quality of care that you're delivering. I mean, let's face it. Most of us went into healthcare because we wanted to help other people. And if you're not delivering a quality service or quality product, then you're not doing your job. I always kind of thought, in my naive way of looking at things, that uh, if you put all of your emphasis on quality, then the cost would go up. Now, if you begin cutting costs, the quality will go down. But I think, to the credit of many healthcare leaders across the country, we've found a better way to balance those two and keep those both in line and keep the appropriate level of focus both on quality and cost. Now, in the quality side of things, and that also brings in the compassionate side, because really what I tell people is, when a patient comes to our hospital, they expect two things, basically. They expect good quality health care. Okay, that's a given. That's something you need to address first and foremost. But they also expect that care is to be delivered in a kind and compassionate way. Once again, I think that's the thing that we've probably drifted away from a little bit because we're so focused on the finance, we're so focused on the quality metrics that we need to achieve. Let's make sure that we're meeting the expectations of our customers or our consumers, and that's that the care that we're delivering is delivered in a kind and a compassionate way.
That's good. I try to keep a nuanced approach to things, Jim, but I've often felt that in either industries, companies, and teams, there are two types of people: survivors and thrivers. And I feel like in the industry that you came from, it's a lot of survivors. Like there's very few that thrive.
Right.
How can we sort of, and I think, if you were put it on a scale, I think survive will probably like weigh the scale all the way down. And there's always going to be a point where there's people just surviving, whether it's because of, budget constraints, geographic constraints. How do you think we can probably shift the scale a little bit where there's more thrivers in healthcare?
You're absolutely right. I think I spent most of my career just surviving, because of the challenges that we were faced with, the things we had to deal with on a daily basis. Uh, I would like to think that in some cases I felt like I was beginning to thrive a little bit, and there probably were some successes like that along the way. But those were relatively few in number compared to some of the major challenges that I faced. I think in many cases I'd like to go back and be able to do some of those over again. 2020 hindsight allows you to sort of see things from a different set of eyes. Uh, but I think you're right because of the magnitude and the velocity of change and the way things that healthcare has changed over the years. I think many of us are in a survival mode and kind of wondering what the next obstacle is going to be and what's the next thing next challenge that's going to come our way. Uh, so I really don't have a good answer to that. I really would like to think that we get to a point where we're just thriving and doing well, but there's going to be bumps in the road.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. So to share a little something about myself, Jim, I worked for basically my entire adult life at a radio station in New York City, and when you're and I hate using this word, the quote unquote talent, you kind of look at suits kind of like with like a scrunchy face, like, oh, the suits, what do they know what they're doing? And the running joke with all of us who were on the air was like, oh, the suits are just the people that couldn't make it on the air, so they became suits. So there was always sort of this friction between the suits and the talent, and I'm curious because we all know about, and this could be a stereotype, about the physician's ego. There was that great movie years ago. It was like an Alec Baldwin movie where he talks about being a surgeon. He goes, "I am God." What was it like being a leader in healthcare when you weren't a physician? Were those sort of like soap opera, White Lotus type situations that I'm describing that you ran into, and specifically early in your career? I'm sure because later in your career, Jim, you had the receipt, so no one was going to doubt you. But early in the career, did you have any of those friction points with
Oh,
physicians?
sure, sure. I think every healthcare leader would give examples of friction that was present with physicians. There's some strong personalities, okay, and but I say that from the context of most physicians that I worked with just wanted us to be delivering good care for their patients. And then when they saw an issue or saw something that was going on where they didn't feel that their patients were getting the level of care that they deserved, uh, that's what they got most upset about. Okay. Now, the administrators or healthcare executives, once again, we're trying to balance the budget. We're trying to deal with the financial challenges. Sometimes it's difficult to meet all of the expectations that a physician may have. Uh, Let me just say this, I've got a tremendous amount of respect for the medical profession. I've been able to work with some wonderful physicians over my career. Many of them do have a bit of an ego, but I can tell you that's the type of ego that I want to have as a patient because I want them to be looking out for my best interest and I want them to speak up for my needs at that point. Now you talked about early in my career, when you're right out of school, you don't have much, you don't have much credibility. Okay. So when you're trying to deal with an issue and deal with a physician who's been in practice for 20, 25 years and you're right out of graduate school, uh, you're not going to get very far in that argument. So there were many times where honestly, I just used those as opportunities to learn. Learned a lot of hard lessons along the way. Probably again, if I could, I could like to go back and deal with some of those issues differently. Uh, Really, not just in early in my career, but throughout my career. In retrospect, I'd like to go back and be able to unwind some of those things and do them over again. But that's not the way the cards fall. Uh, Leaders are faced with circumstances that you have to make decisions sort of on the spot. Okay. And you take the information you have before you use your best judgment and you move forward. Sometimes after the fact, you go back and critique yourself and you learn of information that you didn't have at the time. And you may have done things differently, but that's part of the process. That's part of the challenge of being a leader.
Wow. I'm curious with those moments, and it's now been debunked, but the term imposter syndrome still gets thrown around, even though I think the person who invented the term had kind of backtracked on it. Did you suffer from that earlier in your career as to, because I always like to put myself in other people's shoes, even though you probably shouldn't do that, but I'd be like, how the hell am I supposed to tell a doctor who, like you said, has 20 years of experience, has like cut brains open? Who am I to tell them X, Y, and Z?
Yeah.
Was that a struggle for
Oh,
you
yeah.
at any
Yeah,
point in your career?
absolutely. And I think a good example of that was, when prospective payment system first went into place back in the 1980s, physicians also had to learn to change their practices to deal with the reimbursement of Medicare. Good example would be just the length of stay or the length of time that a Medicare patient would stay in the hospital. It was not uncommon for patients during that era to stay in the hospital, 7, 8, 9, 10 days, to receive care. Medicare comes along and puts restrictions on that and says, well, for this particular diagnosis, we feel that the patient can be cared for in 2 days or 3 days. So we as administrators or executives had to go to that physician and say, look, you need to start thinking about discharging this patient. And they'd look at me and say, who are you to tell me how to practice medicine? This is the way I was taught. This is the way I learned to practice. And this is the way I'm going to care for my patient and make sure that they receive the care that they need. And if it means staying longer time, that's what needs to be done. Well, the unfortunate thing is the hospital was being penalized because we were only going to be paid for a length of stay of 2 or 3 days. and yet the physician felt that the patient needed to stay longer. So that's just one example of many to where you feel very uncomfortable having that conversation with a physician, and you sort of come across as telling him how to practice medicine, and that's really wasn't the case, except that that's the way they took it sometimes.
Wow. A physician friend of mine says to me, all physicians are leaders. Like, no matter what, if you got that coat on, you are a leader. But some struggle with that because I feel like in society and especially Western culture, there's certain uniforms that make you like stand up a little bit. So when you see someone wear a military uniform or you see a police officer or firefighter, you kind of like, you stiffen up a little bit. Doctors, same way. You see that white lab coat, you're like, oh, okay, here comes someone important. That they must have some sort of, they have an aura. They have the leader. The doctors that you've worked with during your career, and I know it was a long one, did most of them grasp that as physicians, no matter what they thought, they were leaders?
I think most of them appreciated the level of respect that they had from other people. Uh, some of them, once again, egos are different from person to person, but some of them use that to basically describe what you said earlier. I'm the physician, and what I say goes. Uh, the white coat syndrome is one that has been around in medicine for a long time. Interesting enough, that's changed a lot in recent years because a lot of the physicians you encounter, certainly in their own office or in the hospital world, don't walk down the halls with lab coats anymore. They're dressed casually, just like you and me. Okay,
Wow.
and I think many of them, particularly the young generation of physicians, recognize that we do have a level of standing, we do have a level of respect, but we're also a human being just like everyone else. And I can appreciate that. I can appreciate the fact that they understand the needs of the patient and are not just wanting to sort of throw around their knowledge. They're certainly very knowledgeable, so when they speak, I listen. Believe me, because they've got the education, they got the training, they got the experience. But the bottom line is they're humans just like you and us, and they're there to care for other people. They've got a level of training and education that we don't have, and you ultimately have to have respect for what they have to say.
That's good. Good stuff. I want to pick a couple things in the book. You write about your time at Baptist Health, and I'm just very like nosy about this because I don't think I've ever been to like a religiously connected hospital in my life. Is there anything different in running sort of a faith-based like hospital as opposed to a secular one or non-secular? Like, tell me about that sort of dynamic.
No, I think there is a difference. Okay, and I think there's multiple examples of that all across the country, whether it be a Baptist hospital, a Catholic hospital, a Presbyterian, Lutheran. Many of them were founded on some sort of basic value system, in most cases a Christian belief. And I think the culture of the organization reflects that in most cases. Uh, and I think my time at Baptist really taught me the importance of that because once I became a member of the staff there and got to know the people, you could basically sense it and feel it that faith-based value system was there, which drove everything that happened within the organization. And so, yes, I think there's a difference. Now, I've worked in some secular hospitals too that had a similar culture of caring, similar family atmosphere. So I'm not really discrediting any of those in any way. And really, most hospitals that I know of have some sort of culture that has some connection to the overall, uh, you know, compassionate side of healthcare. But a faith-based organization is a little different. What can I say? And I think that's a tribute to them. Uh, I just recently had the opportunity to visit a colleague of mine at a Catholic hospital, and you look around the hallways and you look at the values that are posted on on the wall. And you really sense that there's a different focus there that goes beyond the bricks and mortar, goes beyond the technology, and goes beyond the actual delivery of healthcare. There's a value there that reflects that faith-based belief, and it's important to everyone who works there.
That's great. That's awesome. We talked about crucibles, and I want to start wind down the conversation talking about some of the personal crucibles in your life. And I know you've gone through some health issues, but in the book you write about your wife's accident. Tell me, well, if you don't mind sharing that story, and tell us how that sort of changed the way you looked at dealing with patients that dealt with traumas.
Right. Well, to be very brief, let me describe what was going on at that time. I was actually working at the Baptist Health System during that period of time. We were going through some difficult times financially, and a lot of changes happening within the organization. Some leadership changes that were occurring, and a lot of that I knew potentially could affect me. So, there was a period of time where I kind of wondered what the future was going to look like, both for the organization and for me personally. And about the same time, unfortunately, actually, I was in a board meeting at the time when my phone started vibrating. I had it on vibrate mode, and not to disturb anyone. So I just ignored it. I looked at the number and I didn't recognize it, so I ignored it and thought, well, I'll just follow up with that later. So after the meeting was over, I went out to the hallway and I called the number that had called me, and there was a gentleman on the other end that said, "I don't want to alarm you, but your wife has just been in a very tragic car accident, and she is on her way to the trauma unit at the University of Tennessee Medical Center." So really, my mind started swirling. I was dealing with the issues I just described with the hospital and my future, and then all of a sudden, my focus basically shifted to her. I got in my car and drove as fast as I can, and was able to meet up with her while she was still in the emergency room, uh, getting ready to go into surgery. And the surgeon said, "Well, I hate to say this, but she's got two broken bones in one leg and a dislocated ankle in the other, and so we're going to have to do a lot of repair in the surgery that's before us." So, that changed my outlook on a lot of things. It changed the way I viewed myself as a person, as a husband. Changed the way I dealt with people, both in terms of my leadership style and my interactions with them. Uh, that is one of those personal life happens moments that you can't control, but they're going to happen. And I think most leaders will attest that throughout their career, not only did they have things happen in their professional lives that altered the way that they led the organization, but there were things perhaps that happened in their personal life. It could be the death of a loved one. It could be a severe illness. It could be anything that happened that you have to deal with outside of work, but it also influences your effectiveness on the job as well. So that event with my wife really changed things dramatically. Now, let me continue with the story a little bit, if you don't mind. She had surgery, she recovered, but she spent 3 months in a wheelchair and in a hospital bed in our basement. And so I became the primary caregiver for those 3 months period of time, on top of trying to do my job, which, as I mentioned, was very precarious at that time. So it was a very difficult period of time. That 3 month period probably taught me more in terms of focus and self-discipline, looking at things that were important versus things that were not important. It changed a lot. It also changed the way in which I began interacting with people, because I really learned that life is very fragile and life is very precious, and we need to recognize that each and every day. So whether it be the patients we were caring for, the employees that were working in the organization at the time, and my other family members. I became much more attuned to their needs, and it really changed my outlook on a lot of different things. Um, Now, lucky enough, she's still here with me today. We've been married over 40 years, and so life goes on. But that was a very difficult period of time. It certainly
Oh,
changed my outlook on a lot of things.
that's wonderful. Thank you very much for that story. And people should definitely pick up the book and read that. It's funny. I often say that us humans, we are so bad at self-awareness. Like we are so unself-aware of our surroundings, everything that's going on in life. And it takes a moment like that for you for all of a sudden to flip that switch to be like, oh, my world revolves way more than this stupid job or like the budgets or the fact that I may lose my job. Like it's amazing how we sometimes need to be awakened, right, from our lack of self-awareness.
We get so hung up with some of the most insignificant things in our lives. Uh, I like to play golf, and I'm a terrible golfer, but I kind of wish that I could be better. But at the end of the day, you recognize how insignificant that is in comparison to the loss of a loved one, the potential loss of a loved one, uh, the importance of remaining focused in the job that you're being paid to do. And sometimes as humans, we have a hard time sort of taking those insignificant things in our lives and moving them to the side and focus on the things that are really important.
Yeah. All right. Jim, I always like to wrap up these conversations, taking folks behind the dedication of the book. And you dedicate the book to the hundreds of thousands of healthcare professionals across our great country. Their dedication, service, and compassion epitomize the heart of leadership. Why was it important to dedicate it to the group of folks that essentially your book is for?
Well, I just think that's really the audience in which my book was intended. I've got a tremendous amount of respect for people who work in healthcare, both in the clinical side as well as the administrative side. There's difficult times, okay? And I just felt that I needed to acknowledge that in terms of the people who are out there every single day, devoting their time and their expertise to help other people. We saw that really displayed fabulously during the COVID years. Now, at that point in time, I'd already moved out of a hospital setting into working at a blood center. So I really can't speak to the day-to-day challenges that they were facing, but I was close enough to it to hear some of the stories, just the long hours, the the precautions that had to be taken, some of the difficult clinical issues that they were dealing with, both in terms of sickness and a lot of times death. And it really took its toll on the healthcare industry. And so I felt that as I was writing this book, I needed to acknowledge that. And I just want to dedicate it to the people who are out there really on the front lines dealing with those healthcare issues day to day. I certainly appreciate it, and I hope the general public does.
Awesome. He is James L. Decker. The book, Reviving the Heart of Leadership, Empowering Healthcare Executives to Lead with Compassion. Jim, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate the time.
And that's going to do it for this episode. If you want to find out more information about Jim and our other amazing authors, go to theauthoritycompany.com.